Hey guys, Tyler here, and this is the Garage Warrior podcast and videocast. And I'm super excited today to have on the call with me Nick Pineault. How's it going today, Nick?
Hey Tyler, I'm good. Yourself?
I'm doing all right, man. Like we were just talking before, it's just a
Yeah.
never-ending stream of creativity that sometimes gets flustered with too many things in a row, you know?
Oh yeah, we're always busy. Keeping ourselves busy. We like it though.
Well, you've been actually a pretty busy guy because Nick, we met just over a year ago down in
Hmm.
Costa Mesa at one of the fitness business summits, and you're this eager young guy with the man purse on the side,
Yeah.
full of your books and ideas, and you hadn't quite cracked on the scene yet. You hadn't quite cracked on and released your first product. You were working on
Yeah,
some stuff
exactly.
with different people, and now you're like a household name in this scene. You've got The Truth About Fat Burning Foods, which
Thanks.
is one of the best sellers out there, and it's a fantastic book, by the way. I have actually gone through the whole program and checked it out myself, and I really,
Hmm.
really enjoy it. And you've kind of made this nutrition nerd thing become,
Hmm.
like this whole persona and everything. So,
Yeah.
I'm done edifying you. Why don't you just give us a 50,000-mile view of who is Nick Pineault, just in case people don't know, and what are you hoping to teach people?
Sure. So yeah, I'm Nick Pineault. I'm working here with Jen. You can probably see in the background.
She's in the mirror in the background if you guys are watching the video.
Yeah. So me and Jen, we're just two normal people from Montreal, Quebec. And we're trying to crack the code on nutrition, on what's healthy, what's not, and how people can actually apply that on their lives. Not only providing people with like, okay, here the truth about superfoods and stuff like that, but actually, hey, what do you do in your life? Like you go to the grocery store, how you can actually manage to implement everything you learn online, and it gets very confusing
Sure.
how you can implement that in your life. So we launched, like you said, Truth About Fat Burning Foods is basically what I like to call the Bible of healthy eating. Basically, it's like, okay, I'm gonna go through all sorts of protein sources, carb sources, sugars, veggies, fruits, and figure out for myself what's the healthiest kinds you can have, what labels you need to look at a grocery store, and put that into one resource. And that's what
Right.
we did in last May. And it worked really good. People like it just because it makes everything more simple. I think the number one problem people have online these days is that they read a tad here, and they can't quite figure out how to put all the puzzle together, right? They
Right.
just sometimes they end up more confused and just paralyzed by all this information.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more, man. I think that's one of the big problems we see is just like there's so much out there. So my question to you is, how did you originally disseminate all this information? Because one of the things people have is like I do coaching calls with people and I'll talk to them and it seems like they don't have a filter for what's potentially real and what's potentially not. I'll share with them like a
Yeah.
simple fat loss diet, and then they'll be like, "Well, my friend was telling me about this hot dog water diet where you like," and I'm like, "How did that make its way into your consciousness of
Yeah.
reality?" So tell me, how did you originally kind of disseminate all this information?
Yeah, sure. It's really hard because on one side I had the information I had at the beginning was my education, and basically it's none because most people don't have any nutritional information or education per se. The only thing they learned is what they see on TV,
Sure.
and it's what the companies want them to see. So I started from that and realized, looking over a couple documentaries, independent documentaries like Food Inc. and these kind of documentaries, like, oh, maybe I don't know anything about nutrition after all. And then I started reading a lot of bloggers that seemed to me, just going by feeling, like Dr. Mercola, Chris Kresser, all these independent resources that seem to be genuine in what they're trying to recommend, not too silly about their products. And then I just started reading a ton of these authors and trying to look at, oh, okay, why are these people going against the grain? Is it because just they feel like it? Is it because maybe the government and the official recommendations from Health Canada or the FDA in the United States, maybe they're not up to date? Maybe they rely on old studies after all, or maybe the companies and the lobbyists make it so that certain recommendations stay that way for a long time. The best example that basically changed my life when I read about the story about trans fats. You know, trans fats is like probably the one kind of ingredient that's proven to kill you after
Right.
like just a couple of grams a day
Everybody
for a
knows
couple
it's
of years.
bad now.
Yeah, everybody knows it's bad, but it turns out in the 50s, just at the beginning of the hydrogenation of vegetable oil, and basically they used to do margarine with coconut oil actually in the 30s, and it was really costly, so they tried to look for a cheaper alternative. So vegetable oils were starting to get popular at the time, and then hydrogenation made it so that they could make the thing spreadable, right? And then some scientists began in were in just in at the beginning of the 50s, and they were like, hey, maybe trans fats are dangerous. You know, they're man-made, and we did some studies on mice, and it's 60 years ago or more. So it's very, to me, I was like, oh, wait a minute, these guys were like 60 years in advance telling people maybe that's dangerous. But it turns out that, I mean, the industry did a lot of money, and the governments followed their lead, their internal studies saying that everything was fine. But guess what? 2007, I think, finally they were labeled in the United States. So basically, for a whole 50 to 60 years, consumers not only didn't know that trans fats, whether trans fats were bad or not, they didn't know that trans fats existed at all
Right.
because they were not labeled. So that's the one thing that just told me, okay, wait a minute. Sometimes the governments and the institutions, they mean well, or I mean, I like thinking people mean well, but they want to make money as a first priority, not necessarily making people healthy. But in the end, it seems that corporations and even governments and even the best organizations out there recommended that trans fats replace animal fats in all fast foods in the 80s.
Right.
So, and it was a very bad move
Yeah.
considering the fact that trans fats are very dangerous, but that's what they thought was the best thing to do back then. So, a long story just to tell you that I think independent people that seem genuine, non-profit, or at least no attached to big companies, and that seem to have their thinking together. That's what I try to look for, and then you just have to go by gut feeling after that.
Yeah, yeah, and there's also the whole concept of n equals one, trying something out on yourself, genuinely giving it an honest shot,
Oh, sure.
and if it
Yeah.
works for you, then great, you just found what works for you, and if it doesn't, then don't become married to that dogma and try something else, which is something I see,
Yeah.
people in communities that I won't mention, vegan, that get married to a dogma and then they just follow it all the way down when at
Yeah.
first they might feel healthy and so on and so forth, and then over time they kind of see a health decline and they blame their lack of being more diligent on not getting results, so they go more
Definitely.
hardcore. Like I see that all the time. I
Yeah.
like that approach. I can tell this is going to be a fun call, Nick, because one of the other things that you were talking about, like people didn't know trans fats existed. Well, I came from a family where like diet soda was a health food and
Yeah.
margarine was healthier than butter. Like we didn't just have this and not understand it. We fully believed and fully bought into
Yeah.
the fact that butter was bad for us and margarine was good for us. I mean, like,
Yeah.
how does this happen? Like, how does this happen in so many different areas?
It's I can tell there's a lot of financial ties attached to it. So, for example, margarine. I mean, the oil producers and even the farmers, corn, soy, and all these vegetable oils, they represent a lot of money. And you just see here in Quebec. I come from a family where I mean diet stuff. We didn't drink a lot of diet stuff, but I can tell you margarine was like, okay, this is the healthy stuff. The Becel, Becel is like the brand, the popular brand in Quebec for
Right.
margarine. Yeah, we always had margarine, and I didn't never questioned it. And guess what? When we look at TV, margarine, the B cell margarine is all over the place, and it's
Sure.
like approved by the Canadian Heart Association and stuff like that. So you're like, hey, these guys know their thing, right? They're like
Right.
an association of like MDs looking over stuff, and yet it's just not up par to like the actual research that's showing that extra omega 6s are inflammatory. People get too much of them, and then you've got the processing, which leaves some contaminants in there, and also sort of trans fats that get created in the process. So basically, it's not a food at all. It's you should never eat these vegetable oils at all, and yet they're recommended on TV. And one of the on the prime time, you see that recommended as like a health food. So how can people know better? They can't
Yeah.
really.
It's almost like the advertising becomes the education, and it's all based on just market share. Hey, I have seed oil market share. I have invested in this. I have factories that produce this and marketing behind it. And so we're so deep down this rabbit hole. If we quit now, we lose all this money, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And for example, for the government, it's really hard. These guys, if they change their recommendations, right? The one day they change their recommendation, let's say that the Canadian government and the US government just stop recommending margarine and they're like, okay, never eat that again. We're talking about like tens of thousands of jobs lost.
It's so complicated.
So yeah, there's a huge consequence to these recommendations, and if they're not sure of what they're doing, and without talking about the pressure of the industry, like if you're working for B cell margarine, you don't want a government to stop recommending margarine. So in a sense, it keeps the whole thing going. That's why it takes 50 to 60 years for official recommendations to change. It's not easy for official all this everything is so I mean it's so solid together, all these ideas
Right.
and this economy and these companies. So what I like suggesting people, like you said just a couple minutes ago, is like, okay, try it for yourself. Stop having margarine, stop having vegetable oil. And most people report like, oh, 1 week and you feel better, I'm less inflamed, I have less pain in my joints, or my acne just disappears, stuff like that. Test it out for yourself and you'll see the difference. And guess what, the official recommendations, you're not obligated by law to follow them. You can, they're a guideline, but to be honest, they're really far now from reality, and there's a lot of stuff they recommend that to me it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that because I was getting all vilifying there for a second, and then you have to
Yeah,
mention the fact that hey, somebody's depending on their job out
yeah,
there, and it's so complicated, and it's such a big
yeah,
thing across the board. Let's talk about the actual logistics of it, though. Let's talk about oils. People are hearing us talk about like butter is evil, but we're not really giving them the details. So
yeah.
can you tell us why is a seed oil or these high omega-6 fatty acids, why are these bad for you, and why should maybe somebody switch to things like coconut oil, butter, palm oil, and so on and so forth rather than these seed oils?